Hey everybody, and welcome to Adapt or Perish. In this episode, we're talking about the seminal work of science fiction from H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. But before we start talking time travel, let's talk about our next episodes. First, our next Adapt or Perish mini. We're going back to the kids section of the library for a look at a true classic, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. We'll be discussing the original 1978 picture book by Judy and Ron Barrett and the 2009 animated adaptation written and directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. That'll be out in 2 weeks on Tuesday, February 18th. Then, in our next regular episode, we're traveling the world, and our guide, Jules Verne. We're going to be discussing his 1872 novel Around the World in 80 Days and looking at big and small screen adaptations released from 1956 to 2021. That'll be out in a month on Tuesday, March 4th. If you'd like to send us any comments, questions, or corrections about today's episode, you can always email us at adaptorperishcast@gmail.com. And you can find more ways to get in touch with us, as well as show notes from this and all other episodes on our website, adaptorperishcast.com. And with that, on with the show, Adapt or Perish, episode 158, The Time Machine. Hello and welcome to Adapt or Perish, a podcast about adaptation. I'm Jeremy Latour.
And I'm Ian Averill, and today we're talking about H.G. Wells' The Time Machine.
This is one of those ones that, like so many before, I have wanted to do this one for years. It has been in the backlog for years and years and years and years, and finally we're doing it. And the reason we never did it is because I knew going into it that none of the adaptations were really that great. Yeah. But we're doing it.
It's one of those ones where you hesitate because none of them are very good, but also there aren't very many of them. So
yes, and it's The Time Machine. Like I just want to be so clear. H.G. Wells literally coined the term time machine. It can be traced to him. I feel like it's hard to understate the book's impact. And I feel like its impact goes beyond what the book is even about. You know, I'll say here at the top before we do it back of the book is about two things. On the one hand, it's about how cool it would be if someone had a time machine.
Yep.
And on the other hand, it's about how bad capitalism is.
Yeah. That's why, Back to the Future, exactly the same story.
Yes.
But it's about those exact same two things.
Was the first one about those exact same two things?
No, it's really, okay, I guess it's really just part two.
No, it's just part two. Because, part one is definitely, like, pro-capitalism.
Yeah, part one, I was going to say, part one is not only not going into the future, but also very pro-capitalism.
Yeah. But at least the second one goes to the future anti-capitalism.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it full anti-capitalism, but definitely more than the first one. It's very anti-Biff, really, more than anything.
I like how this is kind of a weird backdoor pilot to us doing a time travel movie podcast at some point.
A thing we have talked about in the past.
I'd be interested in doing it one day in the far future.
It's a great thing to talk about because what's wonderful about time travel fiction is that it's got to be the number one thing that, like, I love stories that involve time travel.
Yep.
But then it's kind of balanced by how much it's weird that I love it so much when also I think that most stories about time travel kind of don't work, break themselves, and maybe shouldn't exist. So, but that's part of what makes them so fun.
Yeah.
But that's always a part of the story is how does this not work in a way that makes me be like, yeah, maybe don't do this if you haven't really, if you don't have a really interesting angle or, and I'm not talking about this story. This is a classic.
Right.
And also the time travel is not 100% what it's about. So
no, and this one has an angle. It has such a strong angle, in fact, that everyone who decided to adapt it said, fuck this angle.
Yeah, let's. Everyone that decided to adapt it was like, let's bring in some nonsensical, wrong time travel bullshit.
Yeah, but anyway, let's go back. So H.G. Wells,
Mm-hmm.
this is the second time we're covering him because we did The Island of Dr. Moreau recently.
Yes.
He also, he wrote this, The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Invisible Man and the War of the Worlds. If that was all he wrote, that would be amazing, but it's not all he wrote. He did so much stuff.
Yeah.
He's truly one of the giants.
Totemic. Yeah.
And one of the books he wrote is The Time Machine. And I'd like to do a quick back of the book for people that may not know the story that well. When a Victorian scientist propels himself into the year AD 802,701, he is initially delighted to find that suffering has been replaced by beauty, contentment, and peace. Entranced at first by the Eloi, an elfin species descended from man, the time traveler, those capital T, the time traveler, for he has no name, soon realizes that these beautiful people are simply remnants of a once great culture, now weak and childishly afraid of the dark. They have every reason to be afraid. In deep tunnels beneath their paradise lurks another race descended from humanity, the sinister Morlocks. And when the scientist's time machine vanishes, it becomes clear he must search these tunnels if he is ever to return to his own era.
It's a simple book.
Yeah, a really simple book. And someone might be saying who doesn't know it very well, capitalism? What are you talking about? Oh, we'll get to it.
Yeah, well, we will.
We'll get to it.
Jeremy, what did you like this book? What did you think about it?
It's okay.
Yeah.
I really I liked. There are some parts of it that I thought were amazing.
Mm-hmm.
There also were some parts of it that I found to be kind of head scratchers.
Mm-hmm. Like what?
Weena.
Yeah.
And I understand we're only a few minutes in and already I'm bringing up Weena.
Yeah.
So maybe you know what? Let's stick a pin in Weena for a second. Let's pick up the tiny little Eloi. Let's just stick her up on the board.
Uh-huh.
We'll come back to her. She's gonna hang there and just be cool because that's what they do. They just hang out and be cool.
Yeah. They just chill and eat fruit all day, baby.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up my notebook. I'm going to pick her up under one arm, pick my notebook up in the other arm, and I'm just going to pace back and forth across the stage doing my TED Talk about the time machine. She's just going to be dangling there.
You've got your notebook in one hand and Weena in the other. Is that
yes?
What, yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a similar line from the book that I found extremely funny.
Yeah, this is a setup for the one person who loves the book. They're going to be like, I see what he's doing. But I think we should go through the plot a little bit, and maybe while we're going through, we can talk about some of the things that we liked and didn't like about it. So as the book starts, the time traveler, for he is not the one telling the story. The person telling the story is a friend of the time traveler. Mm-hmm. He goes to the time traveler's house, and the time traveler says, I have invented a machine that will move you through time. A time machine, if you will. Mm-hmm. And his friends say, we won't. And he says, no, but really. And he shows them his little time machine, because what he's decided to do is he's decided to make an exact, just an exact replica of what he thinks a full-size time machine will be. Mm-hmm. And he pushes a little button, pushes a lever, and it disappears. And they say, what have you done? Is this just a trick? And he says, no, it is gone to the future. They say, bullshit. And he says, but let me explain to you the fourth dimension for quite a number of pages.
Yes.
This was one of the parts of the book that I thought was fantastic. I love it.
Sure.
I love H.G. Wells discussing the idea of time travel and the idea of the fourth dimension. It is one of my two favorite versions of this explanation. One is from this one, and the other one is Carl Sagan from Cosmos explaining it. So I'm just saying, I think it's pretty great.
The whole thing of the main character doesn't have a name, and the framing device of his scientist friends, like it being from their perspective, some of it is one of the things that I really love about the book. I think that works really well. I don't know how you feel about it, but
I think it's great.
I liked it. But yes, I also really like him expounding on time being the fourth dimension and giving them walking them through it. That's always fun.
Yeah, I feel like the reason I like it so much, the reason I like the framing device so much, if Wells decided to write it from the perspective of the time traveler telling his story to the reader, I feel like he would have had to dumb it down a little bit. Mm-hmm. But because the book is the time traveler recounting his tale of time travel to his high-minded friends, he doesn't really dumb it down very much for them.
Yeah. Yep.
And even though a lot of the stuff he's saying is sci-fi bullshit,
Oh, sure.
it's the way he's saying it that I really appreciate.
Yeah.
There's always this tinge of, and then of course I did this because, as we all know, I mean, obviously this is what happened and this was my hypothesis, but that turned out to be wrong because I only knew half the story. Like he's talking about it as a scientist talking to other scientists, and I enjoy
Right.
that.
Yeah, no, it's good. And it's, there's parts of it that are sci-fi bullshit, and there's also, parts of it that ring true. However, it's the same thing with for even today, for all of our, like, we don't really have time and how it works nailed down any better than they did then, in my opinion. And so, there's all kinds of different ideas about the nature of time, but all the way back then, somebody came up with the idea of it as the fourth dimension, which is just a really fun and good way of explaining it to people in a context they can understand.
Mm-hmm.
That's fun. It may not be necessarily accurate, but obviously that doesn't matter. It's just fun.
So he tells his friends, I've invented this tiny machine, and what I want you all to do is come back in a week, come to dinner, and I want to tell you some stuff. And they're like, okay, fine. So they all leave. They come back. And he shows up late. And he looks a mess. Yeah. And he says, gentlemen, I have a story to tell you.
His housekeeper says he's been gone for several days.
Yeah. And he says, gentlemen, I have a story to tell you. And they said, you sound terrible. And he says, I know. And he tells them the story of going into the future. And there's no part of this that he's not keeping anything back from them. He tells them, this is exactly what happened. I did this. I went here. I went here. I went here. I went to this part of the future. I went to this part of the future. I went to this part of the future. And I ended up in the year 800 and something. And I met these people.
Yeah.
So he describes meeting the Eloi, and he goes to London in the future and explores this beautiful, beautiful world. I'm fascinated by the future that Wells describes in that we've eradicated disease and decay. It's a beautiful place. It's this Garden of Eden because we've eradicated those things. Like, apparently in this future, things don't decay because we figured out at some point in the previous 800,000 years, we figured out how to stop that. And he's never really, Wells is never really presenting it as an ideal future. Like, I feel like he writes it as idyllic, but not ideal. And he writes it in a way that makes me think his view was, well, of course, this is what we would do. And the Eloi are humanoid. They are described as tiny, soft, gentle, happy, completely useless little shitheads.
Yeah, it's like somebody complaining about Gen Z, which is which is an interesting thing about the book where it's just like, I feel like it starts out with one of his incorrect assumptions being thinking that the way the world is now that he sees in the future is because, the goddamn new generations and they've blah, 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 blah. They've all got to sit, and then learns that no, actually it's a system problem, which I think is another thing that is like very similar to today.
Mm-hmm. No, one of the things I also enjoy about the book is that Wells is, so just to be clear, Wells was a socialist, and socialism looms very large in the text, and I'm here for it, by the way. It's great. But the time traveler's not a socialist.
Right.
The time traveler doesn't seem to be anything. He's not saying, the time traveler is not the type of character who says, like, clearly this is the result of capitalism, because that's what ends up happening is we find out that this kind of weirdly dark, really depressing future is just a result of capitalism run rampant for hundreds of thousands of years, the inevitable conclusion of this system. The time traveler never says, man, maybe I think capitalism's the problem. But Wells is clearly writing there, I think capitalism's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same when we talked about Gulliver's Travels. I always feel like I'm super naive saying it, but every one of these older books that we read, it's not like I understand that it's always been the same, that we didn't, like, the problems of today, like, weren't invented in the past 20 years. I understand all that, but it's still shocking to me how much all these old books are just, it's just like the same problems, and how this one specifically is. All the old books all have a general sense of, this rich people and poor people thing is no good. It's for the birds.
Yeah.
It's not going to turn out well.
Because the Eloi are these useless little softies,
Mm-hmm.
but there's these other things that are there that he doesn't see at first, and they live underground, and they're the Morlocks, and they steal his machine. And his interactions with them are fleeting.
Mm-hmm.
They are ridiculously creepy as written in the book.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like every version on screen has been much more of a, like the Morlocks are bigger and stronger than people.
Yeah, which is an interesting choice.
Yeah, because in the book they're absolutely not. They're like they're like little goblins, basically.
They're similarly smaller, like the Eloi. They're basically just kind of like a goth version of the Eloi. You know, they're just kind of like Gollum, kind of, I would say. Like,
exactly.
Like small and skinnier.
And Gollum is really, like, if we bring Gollum into it, Gollum is scary if you're a hobbit, but if you're, a human.
If you're a human ranger, maybe not so scary.
Gollum's not as scary. And so this guy, this full-sized guy, is being at times kind of attacked, and he's always described as being like pawed by them with the little fingers going over him and everything, trying to figure him out. They're completely, like, they can't see in the light. They can only see in the dark because they've been living underground for, millennia at this point.
They're like deep water fish.
Yeah, so like anytime that there's any kind of physical altercation between them, he's messing them up.
Yeah.
Like easily. Sometimes he has a stick and he's messing him up with that, and sometimes it's just his fists and he's messing him up with that. But like they pose no problem. The problem they pose is in their numbers.
Yeah. There's too many of them.
I guess I can kind of see why in all the adaptations people would think, well, that's a different type of scary than we want to do. We'd rather do movie monster scary, and we'll just make them big and strong and physically imposing, which they aren't. But the Morlocks steal his time machine, and he goes on a little bit of a journey to learn more about what's going on here and to try to get his time machine back. The thing he learns is that the reason why, I keep talking about how like this is the inevitable conclusion of capitalism. The reason why everything is the way it is because there was the ruling class, and there were the servant class. And just what ended up happening over millennia is they diverged, and the ruling class became even more insulated, and the servant class got pushed further and further away until they were literally living underground for thousands of years. And they still provided all the clothes for the Eloi and all of the food for the Eloi, and the Eloi didn't even think about it. They had gone so far beyond. It had been literally so many years that the system had been in place that the Eloi were useless. They didn't even remember what the system was or who the Morlocks were or what humans used to be. They have no memory of any of this stuff. So he looks at these soft little creatures as like, oh no, this is what we could become. And he looks at the Morlocks as, oh no, this is what we could make ourselves become. It almost seems like we need to seize the means of production. That's all I'm saying. Oh, and also the Morlocks eat the Eloi.
Yes, there is like a thing where it also has kind of like Ouroboros like back on itself now. Like even though that's where all these groups came from, it has kind of come back around. So the Eloi are to a certain degree victims of the Morlocks, even though the Morlocks are still providing their stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's just how it's always been.
Well, eat the rich. I mean...
Yeah, well, yes. I just find it interesting that there's an aspect to it that is, when he first gets there, he just jumps to the conclusion of this, and then gets a little more informed and is like, no, okay, so I like that about the book quite a bit.
And he's very clear that like his entire, as he's telling his friends about what the future is, it's informed only by the Eloi because that's all he's ever seen.
Right.
And he even says to them, this is the thing he says where he's like, I have half a hypothesis and I was wrong. It was like, yeah, the Eloi are us in the future, but there's like a whole other thing that I did not know about that really changed my appraisal of the situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so he meets Weena, and he takes her with him on an expedition to the Palace of Green Porcelain. Okay. This is a head scratcher.
Okay. What do you got?
Weena.
Oh, well, sure. He rescues her from drowning.
Yeah, I've got her right here. I've been holding her under my arm the whole time. She's just been dangling there, happy as a clam. They have a weird special relationship. She is a lady of the future, tiny little elfin imp, utterly useless. Always positive. Doesn't even know what fire is. He builds a fire and she goes to touch it. And he's like, what are you doing? And she's like, I don't know. And also none of them speak English. This is the other thing. And this has come up for us. This came up in Gulliver's Travels. It's very easy in a book to say, and no one spoke English.
Yeah.
So I couldn't understand them. But in a movie, it's harder to do. So you can there are different, we'll get into the different ways that they handle that. Well, I mean, obviously one of the ways is not handling it, but there are other ways to handle it.
Yeah, in all of the adaptations, the ways of handling it are either not handling it or stupid.
Yes.
So it's tough.
So he's just got this weird special relationship with Weena. She like imprints on him.
Yeah.
Kind of. And
follows him around.
And there's a lot of layers to why Weena makes me scratch my head. There's Weena herself. There's what Wells wrote. There's Weena the character. There's the time traveler's relationship with Weena and Weena's relationship with the time traveler. But there's also this whole idea that the time traveler is also telling his friends about Weena. Mm-hmm. There's just many layers. And each one of them I find horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing explicit in the text except for like one or two weird phrasings.
Yeah, there's nothing explicit, but there's a lot that's implicit.
Exactly. All I can say is that it's weird.
He was intimate with Weena.
Yeah, you get the feeling of that. Yes,
he spends so much time defining the Eloi as basically children.
Yeah,
and then just kind of springs on us this like. Again, it's implicit. It's not explicit, but Wells just kind of very quickly go from, the time traveler has this very kind of weirdly protective relationship with this Eloi. And then it goes very quickly from that to, wait, the time traveler's doing what now? And then it gets even weirder because he like brings Weena with him on this little journey. They get attacked by Morlocks because they have to sleep in the forest. He starts a fire because the Morlocks can't look at light. And he ends up starting a forest fire, and he loses Weena. And that's the last we see of Weena. Yeah. She's lost in the forest fire.
Assumed to have burned to death in the forest fire.
At least he is very broken up about it. I'm lying. He's not. He's fine.
Yeah. Because, while there is some weird subtextual stuff about some not good stuff about their relationship, the stuff that's definitely in text is that he thinks of her as more of a pet.
And that makes it better?
No, I'm saying it doesn't at all. Yeah. It makes it much worse. I'm saying that, like, that's when he isn't really broken up about too much about her, being lost in a forest fire. That is what I think of, like, it's a very odd choice.
So there's a certain thing that comes up for me in the book and the adaptations that decide to do this as him telling the story of his time travel to someone else. Because if we go forward to the 2002 version, which is going to be the last one we talk about, they remove that. That part of it isn't in there. That framing device isn't there. But in the other versions, it is. And in the book, it is. At no point do any of his friends interrupt him.
Yeah.
The story is told
funny.
Always unbroken, and I don't buy it. Because he talks about some weird shit.
Yeah.
And I would just imagine, like, Fred Savage in The Princess Bride style, just going like,
right.
Wait, what?
Right. Exactly.
What are you reading me, Grandpa?
Yeah, Fred Savage in Princess Bride style. Me on this podcast when Jeremy's trying to
found Weena. I started a forest fire. I dropped Weena. I fought the Morlocks. Here we go.
That's very good.
Thank you. I was doing the eye thing, by the way, just in case anyone was wondering. I was doing a perfect Peter Falk eye also. So he starts a forest fire. He loses Weena, and then he gets his machine back. So there's this whole, in the middle of the book, there's this whole big middle section that's kind of his adventure 800,000 years in the future, fighting the Morlocks. He has to go down into the underground to get his time machine, and they set a trap for him because they know he wants the time machine. He gets into it, but they don't know it's a time machine, obviously.
Right. That's actually, can I just real quick interject? Like, that's just one of my favorite little things in the book, is like just the fun little thing of like, they set a trap for him because they're intelligent. They know he wants a time machine, but they don't know that he can just disappear once he has it. So, like, I love stuff like that. I love it when, like, the antagonists are, like, not smart enough to, like, they wouldn't know that, So it's just that simple. Like, I feel like other stories would, like, and we'll get into it, like other versions of the story would have them like jump through hoops to have them be even more intelligent somehow.
Yeah.
But this is just simple. It's just like, if this is what he found, if this is what these societies are like, that would maybe be what would happen. They're trying to trap him, but they don't know what the time machine does. So
Travels through time.
yeah, they don't know that.
They've never had anyone sit down and explain to them the fourth dimension.
Yeah.
So he goes out of there, and then we get the last part of the book. And this is, I think, my favorite part of the book, because he goes into the future.
Yeah.
The further future. And it's this really stark look at I'll call it the end times, even though there's nothing religious about it. It's very much like, no, eventually the sun will like burn out and, heat death of the universe, that kind of thing. And we get a couple of chapters of the time traveler recounting, I went further and further and further. He goes like 30 million years in the future, which now in retrospect, that's not enough. Should have gone way further than that. But, 30 million years in the future, and just describes kind of like, it's a very, very atmospheric part of the book where he's just describing being on a beach and looking at the sun that's red and cooling down, and there's just like a thing crawling on the beach, and just like his feeling of looking at that thing that is the descendant of some animal.
Yeah, it's
harrowing and effective, and that to me like makes it clear that the time traveler's like, I gotta go home.
Yeah, I really like that part as well. I love that kind of stark vistas stuff and just theorizing about, and also it's just like, yeah, the sun's getting bigger, the environment's getting less hospitable, the organisms are kind of going backwards and just becoming simpler and simpler. That's kind of fun. The one thing that isn't really addressed, that was just a little like nitpicky thing for me, is like in all of these parts where he's like traveling farther and farther into the future, where it's very clear that like the Earth no longer supports his type of life.
Yeah.
The book doesn't do anything, doesn't even have any little throwaway scientific thing to be like, he stops and like looks around at like 30 million years in the future, and it doesn't say anything about like the air being any different or the temperature or like whatever. It's fine. It's not like, it doesn't break it for me, but it would be kind of nice if there was some little thing like that for such a scientifically focused book.
Yeah.
I guess.
I mean, I feel like I want to choose my words carefully, because this could easily become what the episode is, just kind of talking about time travel.
Yeah.
Like not talking about real time travel, but talking about the plausibility of time travel in fiction, which I think is an endlessly fascinating topic, but it's not what we're here to talk about. But this episode is about the time machine.
Or is it?
I feel like the quick version for me is, if you're going to tell a time travel story, you need to make your time travel story plausible, and it needs to have rules. And I feel like the thing that always makes time travel stories break for me is when they create a rule, but they didn't think about it long enough. So like, for example, and this could be explained by, over 100 years since the book was published to now. But one of the things about the time machine is that it always travels in time, but not in space.
Right.
He's always in that one spot in London. So it's always London in the future.
Right.
That's crazy.
Right.
Because what is one point in space?
Right. The Earth is moving. The Earth is spinning. The Earth is while spinning, moving in space. The solar system is moving in the universe. Like
everything's expanding. Like that. Like we travel in the same place.
Yeah.
I feel like now that always, unless you come up with a reason for it, that always makes me kind of just like, this is silly time travel. This is fantasy time travel. I should not even, that to me is always the thing that tells me, don't even think about it.
Well, that's, that's one of but that's also one of the things that, how the heck, if they were being that accurate about the science, how the heck would they solve that? Like, so it's one of the things that sometimes you kind of have to be, hand wavy about, but you mean that you'd be fine if they just did a hand wavy thing, but they don't even do that.
That's what I'm saying, because like on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the perfect time machine, which is the TARDIS from Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Because they are, it's it's like the hand waviness is the main feature that makes that work, because they always just say like it can travel in time and space.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you can just go anywhere. Now now you've solved it. Like you did it. All you had to do was acknowledge it, and I'm fine. Now I'm not thinking about it. But I feel like in stuff like this, or like Back to the Future, there's always this thing for me that's just like, okay, well, this is basically magic. I'm not thinking of it as science fiction.
Well, and it's like with what I was just talking about with the far future and the atmosphere probably not being good for him to stop and take a look. Ironically enough, the 2002 version is the only one that actually does something with that. It doesn't do it for the purposes of what it is, but all they needed to do was what that movie does. And that one of the few things that it does well is that when the machine is on, regardless of whether it's actively moving back and forth in time or not, if it's on, if he's like put the key in and started it up or whatever, there's like the Star Trek, there's a static warp shell that is around the whole thing that basically insulates it from the space-time continuum.
The nerdiest way I've ever heard anyone say bubble.
Yeah, there's a space-time bubble around it that insulates it from anything happening in the timeline. They don't even talk about that. They just make it obvious through visuals, which is crazy that movie, which we'll get to, which is bad, does something that pretty okay.
I mean, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about a bunch of things from that movie I like, but
me too.
We'll stick a pin in it.
Yeah. But that's all they had to do. H.G. Wells could have thought of like a bubble.
Yeah, he could have, but he also invented the time machine.
He's like, I've done enough.
Yeah.
I'll leave that for somebody else.
So anyway, the book ends, he gets back, tells all his friends about it. They don't quite believe him. But the guy who's been telling the story,
his one friend kind of does.
No, that's the thing. His one friend kind of believes him, the one who's been telling the story, and they leave. And he comes back a couple of days later, and the like little coda at the end is that he sees that his friend is gone, the machine is gone, and that was 3 years ago.
Yeah,
and he hasn't been back. So clearly, he's been, Sam never did make his way home.
God damn it.
Yeah.
I like that the book, that's another thing I like about the book, is that just leaves that open.
Mm-hmm.
He could have tried to go backwards in time. He could have gone back to the future. He could have done any number of things, and it doesn't try to elaborate about that, or it doesn't try to think about that. Whereas the adaptations are always like he, went back to Weena, or, stuff like that. We'll get into that. But so I like that too. Good book. Mm-hmm. Pretty good book.
That's towering work of sci-fi for foundational sci-fi genius.
Mm-hmm.
Years go by. There'd been different adaptations of it in different media. There was like I think in the 40s there was a teleplay, but it is not extant. So in 1960 there's the first version that we can watch now.
Mm-hmm.
Big Technicolor movie directed by George Pal, written by David Duncan, starred Rod Taylor as the time travel. Oh, what? They've given him a name? What name have they given him? Let me see. H. George Wells. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. No, this is the one that I'm the most fine with.
Yeah.
Like, because all of the adaptations feel like they have to give him a name, which I guess I understand, but I think that you could find a cool way to write it without him having one. But this is the name that's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's okay. But anyway, George Pal, I just want to mention, he was the real deal. Like, him putting his name on something meant something. Like, this was a low budget movie, but it did a lot with the little bit of money that it had. I mean, this guy, he produced When Worlds Collide, The War of the Worlds. He directed Tom Thumb, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. Like, lots of big, beautiful visual effects movies. And this movie uses every single trick to make the world much bigger than the world they actually shot. And it goes beyond, like, so far beyond just like matte paintings and stuff like that. They did every single thing they could. He was a guy who was just really interested in that side of film. But yeah, he was the real deal. His stuff is fun.
Yeah.
Here's my basic thing about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I like this movie, because I'd seen it years ago and I always liked it.
Me too.
But I hadn't seen it in a really long time, and I rewatched it now, and I came out of the experience still liking it. Mm-hmm. The fact that I still like this movie, me personally, that is a testament to me to how much of it works.
Yeah.
Because so much of it doesn't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had the same feeling because I saw it a bunch. I must have had a VHS copy or something because I know I saw it a bunch when I was a kid. I just have very warm feelings and memories about this movie, and I still have them because from a technical and like visual art standpoint, it's a beautiful movie. The prop of the time machine is incredible.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest, like one of the most amazing looking props in cinema history, probably. Like it's awesome. There's a reason why in like the 2002 one, they like, it's obviously it's like a little more advanced and says, but they pretty much make it conceptually the same.
I mean, so did they did the same thing in 1978, and that was a joke.
That's the opposite of what I'm talking about. It's
still obviously based on the same thing.
I mean, kinda.
The time machine itself is beautiful. Like, I would love to have one. Like, I have dreams of like having like a movie theater in my house, and I have like regular chairs, but also just a time machine from this movie sitting there that I could sit in to watch time travel movies.
I mean, the most pretentious, coolest thing you could ever do if you were a rich person and you were like us would be to have your house with your screening room like we would all have, but then have there just for when you're watching movies by yourself, there's just one time machine seat, and then it's actually like you have to turn it on and to the thing, and that like runs the projector, and then it's like coming from behind the thing behind, and it's like the projector is like built into the back of the time machine, and it's like you're riding the time machine and running the movie that you're watching. I don't know. I just came up with this off the top of my head. Maybe it's stupid.
I don't know. I would probably do it once, and then I would just keep watching movies on my phone.
Yes.
But I want to get back to this movie.
Yeah.
The design of it is great. The cast is really fun, too, because Rod Taylor is George. But there's this thing that happens to me in the beginning where everybody starts talking, and if I close my eyes, I have a very special experience.
Okay.
He's there with his friends. Mm-hmm. He's got his closest friend, Philby, who's this Scottish guy.
Yeah.
And so this British guy is talking to this Scottish guy, and there's another British guy there. And if I close my eyes, suddenly it just becomes so clear that George, played by Rod Taylor, is Pongo from 101 Dalmatians.
I didn't realize that.
Their friend Hillier, played by Sebastian Cabot, is the narrator from The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. And Alan Young as Philby.
My favorite performance in the film.
Motherfucking Scrooge McDuck.
Yes, you texted that to me.
Played Scrooge for decades. And he's just Scrooge. Yeah. He's like a nicer version of Scrooge. He's got like a slightly nicer kind of accent, but it still is like it's just the Scrooge accent. Yeah. And it is just a very special thing. And then later in the movie, also I want to mention a new friend of the pod that I've added to the website. It's a guy named Paul Frees. He's almost been in more things than anyone else that we've watched. He's the voice of the rings that tells the Eloi about the past.
Okay.
He's just one of those voices. In the 60s, he was in everything. Tons of Disney stuff, tons of voiceover work. He was in a lot. And yeah, Paul Frees, friend of the pod. I agree with you. I think Philby's the best part of the movie. It's the best performance in the movie.
Yeah.
But just the tone of the movie is killer. It's great and consistent. The effects are really fun. The way they show time travel is inventive and great. Like famously when he's traveling through time and he's in his greenhouse, like there's so much stop motion that they did to show like the fast passage of time, and it just looks fantastic. It's so delightful. The Morlocks, like the design of the Morlocks is iconic. Rod Taylor does such a good job being this kind of leading man. Like, I have problems with this kind of leading man, but if that's what we're going to have, Rod Taylor does a very good job of it.
Yeah.
And Alan Young and the rest of his friends, the rest of just these dudes are all delightful. I love his friends because every single one of them is like very clearly drawn. We don't see them very much because mostly we're in his story, but every single one of them has a personality, and they're all great. This is a fun movie.
It is. It's got a lot of problems, though. It strips down the story in a bad way. The story's already pretty simple. And this one decides to strip out really almost all of the social commentary they were talking about. Not all of it.
Which was all subtext anyway.
Right.
So it doesn't really remove any of the text. It just removes all the subtext.
Yes, because obviously the social commentary stuff was all like what the time traveler was thinking about and stuff. So obviously that's not going to be in the movie. But it's still like the stuff he does exposition to himself about his theories of what has happened to mankind.
Yeah.
Very obviously do not include any of the socialism stuff.
Yes.
Is what I'll say. Like, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, the mankind diverged into two things, one in the light, one in the dark. And that's kind of it, you know.
Some people, the way it's described is some people decided to go down.
Yeah.
Okay. Some decided to stay up. It was their choice.
It's just like a millennia ago, the introverts and the extroverts split into
but the people below still make clothes for the people above for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah, so it definitely strips out some interesting layers, I guess.
Yeah, like it's doing its own thing, but it's just not doing what the book was doing. There's this thing in it where George says, can man control his destiny? Like, that is the question that drives me. It's like, sure, I guess. That's not in the book, though. Like, that's nothing that the time traveler ever says, and that's not what Wells was talking about. It was all about exploration. It was all about, like, let's find out.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Like the end of it. I mean, in the end of it, he just goes he just goes back, right?
Okay, first we should also talk about how the other thing about this movie is that it's more of a straightforward love story between him and Weena. Now,
yes, who is now normal human height.
Right. I mean, while the Eloi are definitely still kind of childlike, they are more just regular adult people in actuality, you know, in their 20s. And so they do, you know.
I think some of them are in their 30s and 40s.
Well, okay.
Or they'd spent a lot of time in the sun.
Yeah. You know, accurate.
By the way, Yvette Mimieux played Weena in this.
So yeah, he goes back at the end. They throw in a cool little, like, where they need to explain it again for the people who are dumb and don't understand how space and time work, you know, where they just like, he dragged the time machine from over there to over there before he left, because if he'd just gone back, you know, as it was, he would have been stuck inside the Sphinx, you know?
So you're talking about, so he's told his story to everybody and then he has disappeared again. And Philby is talking to Mrs. Watchett. Who's Doris Lloyd is Mrs. Watchett, this cleaner, and he's telling her like, here's what must have happened. I can't do just imagine. I'm going to say it, but imagine that it's Uncle Scrooge saying it. Clearly, what must have happened was, yes, the time machine was out in the garden because he said it was in the Sphinx that they had pulled it into. There's a Sphinx, by the way.
The Morlocks dragged it to the Sphinx.
Yeah, and then he dragged it back into the room, but then he decided to go into the future again to be with Weena. That's what must have happened. And now I'm going to walk off into the snow.
You know, he's not even like going exploring more or checking out more things about the future or going to the past. He's just going to the future to settle down and live with Weena in the utopia ? Because I mean,
well, I feel like the important thing to say about this utopia that he's going back to is that they killed all the Morlocks.
Right.
So it feels okay if you assume that the Morlocks were only in that one place. But one thing the book makes clear is that it's the whole world is like this now. Like, there's Eloi everywhere and Morlocks everywhere. So if you blow up the Morlocks in one place, you're blowing up some Morlocks, but like the world is still what the world is.
Yeah, every adaptation does the same thing. It just treats it like all of human civilization is now just this like 50 square miles. Like,
yeah.
And all of the Eloi and all of the Morlocks are all in this one little locale. So it's ridiculous. But even if that were true, even say that is how it is, they kill all the Morlocks. The Eloi way of life does not function now.
No.
And would fall apart.
But now they have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Of course.
And they have to learn to be self-reliant because these little snowflakes don't have anyone taking care of them anymore.
Yep. But except it's going to be him though. He's going to be the daddy coming in.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's nice to know that like even though like capitalism is gone, it's nice to know that he's still there holding up the patriarchy.
Yeah. And it's like very clear that like if he did like he'd just bring capitalism back, like that's
I imagine this movie could have had, any of these movies could have had the same thing. I mean, like the famous, I know I'm spoiling the end of The Graduate, but like you know the last shot of The Graduate?
Yeah.
Like why it's so special, because you have these characters that do this amazing big romantic gesture, and usually that's where the credits roll. But then the thing that Mike Nichols does, he says, no, I'm going to have these two characters sit there and like I'm going to actually show them thinking about this thing that they did.
What did we actually do? Yeah.
What did we just do?
What is our life?
They're actually going to live in the moment for a second, and we're going to watch them. It was revolutionary to do that. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in a movie. I feel like this could have had that. We're just like show his first night sitting around the dinner table with the rest of the Eloy going, here is where I live now. And then realizing that no one knows what he's talking about. He has nothing to talk about to anybody. There's no books anymore. Oh, wait, no. He takes like 3 books with him into the future.
Right. There's a whole thing about which books did he take.
Yeah.
That's the one thing they do leave open to interpretation. Which 3 books did he take?
He took Atlas Shrugged, The Secret, and How to Win Friends and Influence People.
There's one quick funny thing I want to. There's a funny letterbox post I want to read about this movie that I found when I was logging it, and so there's a part of this book where he like quote unquote proves to his friends that this is all true because he still has the flowers in his pocket
that Weena
gave him.
Yeah,
and one of his friends, obviously one of his nerdy scientist bents is botany. Mm-hmm. And he like, oh, maybe it's Philby.
I think it's Philby.
Yeah, I think it is Philby. And he's like, oh, I've still got the flowers in my pocket. Now tell me, Philby, like, are these aren't like any plant that exists now. So that's supposed to be this thing that's like, oh, that proves it, which is ridiculous. But anyway, this Letterboxd user Ely back in 2020 posted a 2.5-star review of The Time Machine. George really went 800,000 years into the future just to bring his boyfriend back a flower, and that's love, baby girl.
Yep. I saw that one.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, this is where, to me, the framing device is broken of him telling the story, because there is no way that his friends don't interrupt him. Because one of the things he tells them all about is like, okay, well, I went into the future a little bit and found out, because it's all, before 1900. And so he goes into the future a little bit to right after World War I has started. And he meets Philby's son, also Philby. But now same actor with a British accent, not a Scottish accent. He sees him and he's like, Philby. And he says, oh, you must mean my father. Oh, he died in the war. And he's like, oh, my friend died in the war. And he's in like, he's a soldier. Yeah. He's telling his friends this story. He's telling Philby this story. And at no point does Philby say, George, wait, hang on, what? What war? And I died in it? And you met my son? And I just like to imagine all of them like constantly putting up their finger to interrupt, and another one going like, no, let him finish. And then he goes into the future further into like, what, the late 60s? Something like that?
Yeah. It's not that far.
He goes into like a nuclear Holocaust future. And he gets there at exactly the right. I mean, his timing is amazing. He stops the time machine at exactly the right moment, literally a couple of minutes before the bombs get dropped and everything goes to shit and London blows up. Everybody goes down into the bomb shelters, but then London kind of blows up in a flow of lava, and it seems like the bomb shelters didn't do anything, but he meets Philby the Younger again. But now Philby the Younger is now older than Philby the Elder was.
Right.
And he's also in a silver spacesuit, and it's kind of amazing. And then like that's another point where I just wanted like Philby to pop in like Fred Savage and just go, wait a wee minute, George, you ran into my son again on the same street? That seems hard to believe.
On the same day of a nuclear holocaust? You think he would have blown past that and only noticed when it happened?
Like by the end, I'm so distracted by his friend not asking him any questions about his son or dying in a future war. I hated it.
So remind me, most of the adaptations do the thing where he basically stops like one place like slightly in the future before going all the way to 800,000 years. That doesn't happen in the book though, or does it? Does he the young Philby thing? Is that in the book?
No, the young Philby thing is not in the book.
In the book, does he literally just go straight to? I mean, sure. There's the cool thing of describing him watching the passage of time, but in the book, does he just pretty much the only place he stops is at 800,000?
From what I remember, From what I remember, he literally just goes straight to the Eloi. Like he talks about seeing everything change,
sure,
but he doesn't really spend any time anywhere.
I think he describes there being some kind of giant cataclysm where everything disappeared all at once.
Yeah.
But he doesn't stop really. And I like how the other, like most of the adaptations, like have to come up with some reason why he went so far. Like, like maybe the bombs going off like made him kick it a little too much into overdrive or something like that.
I just like that before he goes into the future when the bombs go, because like everything's blowing up around him. And he like jumps out of the way of some kind of explosion onto the little patch of grass where the time machine is. And you hear him say in voiceover, "The labor of centuries gone in an instant." And I just wanted him to continue, "But I was fine, for I had made it to the grass."
Yeah, it's pretty silly.
Another line that it would be unfair for me to say that he said this in the movie. He didn't say this in the movie, but I think it's pretty clear this is what he was implying in the movie.
Okay.
He meets the Eloi and he gets really mad because they have let their books turn to dust and they don't give a shit about finding out anything and they have no sense of exploration or science or anything. And he's so mad at them and he thinks of them as children. But then he figures out what happened and he says, I'm paraphrasing this part, "I had no right to be angry with you. It would be like if I went to the island of Bali in my time." And then in my mind, he just continues, "You're like those people, brown people. You're white, but you're like a brown person."
You're like a brown person, but you're very Aryan.
Yes, they're super Aryan.
In this adaptation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and it's funny because I feel like Wells just describes them as like just pink.
Yeah.
Like when he says pink, I think like neon pink. That's the type of pink I imagine.
Yeah, or something like that. Like in the book, they're definitely so unhuman in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
A lot of the adaptations just kind of like envision them as in one way or another, like clean, unspoiled human beings. You know,
like white, blonde human beings.
Well, yeah, or even the ones that where they aren't white, they're just like,
sure,
they're showed as just kind of like plain human beings.
Mm-hmm. Can I end with my favorite line from this movie?
Sure.
He's talking to Weena. He's chatting her up. They're really starting to connect on a romantic level. And she says, "How do they wear their hair? The women of your time." It's amazing.
It's incredible. All that stuff is like so crazy.
There's so much to unpack. Like we don't have time to unpack all of the things that are in this one question.
If it's
this
not
one
already...
statement in this one question.
If it's not clear by what we're describing, the Eloi in this adaptation, 800,000 years in the future, with no similar concepts to any of our culture at all, just speak English.
Yep. She like, and they don't just speak English, but they use the same terminology, like wear their hair. And she gives a shit about how the women of his time wear their hair. Anyway, I still like this movie. You know, it's a movie I don't like though.
What's that?
And I'd never seen it before now. In 1978, there was a TV movie of The Time Machine.
Oh boy.
It was directed by Henning Schellerup. People who've been listening recently might recognize that name. He directed the Jeff Goldblum Dick Butkus Sleepy Hollow.
My brain had lost it. I wasn't prepared for you to say Dick Butkus. Oh boy. Oh man.
It was written by Wallace C. Bennett. It aired on November 5th, 1978 on NBC as part of the Classics Illustrated series. And Classics Illustrated was this fantastic comic that ran for a really long time that adapted classics, but they decided to turn it into a TV show. This is one of the episodes.
Yeah.
Okay. I honestly feel like we could either spend an hour talking about this or 5 minutes talking about this because it is just, it's abysmal.
Yeah. And sure, I mean, the version that we could watch doesn't help by the fact that the quality is super bad.
I bet the one that I watched, the quality looked about as good as it would have, as good or better than it would have looked on TV in 1978.
I mean, yeah, but yeah, okay.
You understand that like TVs in 1978 were like gas powered, right?
Yes, I understand how
If
it
you
works.
were lucky, you had one of the ones with the wheel in the back that you could put your dog in.
But I just mean, like, when you watch crappy, like, yes, it looked close to that, like, on old TV, which didn't look good.
Yeah.
But then you're adding, like, YouTube compression and shit on top of it now.
Yeah.
And it's worse.
Yeah. That's fair.
And, like, the scenes underground with the Morlocks, like...
Oh,
the friggin'...
I fell asleep.
Yeah.
I fell asleep. It's like 20 minutes of pitch black and just the same thing over and over again. It's literally just there's our guy's face and there's a Morlock face and then there's like a scuffle and then there's just more pitch black and then there's our guy's face and there's a Morlock face and that goes on for about 45 minutes.
Yeah, it really feels like they just were like, you have to fill like a half an hour with action with the Morlocks, and they were in the dark. They literally just did it over, like, the Morlock's only move is just like grabbing somebody around the neck from behind and dragging them away, and then the human people wave a torch in front of them and they drop the person, and it's that same interaction like 4 times, like literally. It's crazy. It's a crazy sequence.
It's validating to hear that because I thought I was dreaming it, honestly. This is one of the few times, like, I will be honest, I watched the last 20 minutes of this twice because I'm positive I fell asleep during it once, and I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to watch it. And I went back immediately and rewatched the whole thing, and it was not worth it.
But we've jumped too far ahead. So this one takes place in present time regarding the
Which
adaptation.
is exactly the same as the book.
Yep, totally. It takes place in the 70s. I as I think I said to you before, this one started and it was maybe 10 minutes where I thought I was like, that the YouTube link was wrong and that I was watching the wrong thing.
And you told me that, and I thought, okay, I can't wait. And then I started it, and like, there's a whole title sequence that could not make it clearer that this is the time machine. And I thought, Ian's full of shit. And then after the title sequence then the stuff starts happening with the Russian satellite falling to Earth and everyone at HQ and the Pentagon trying to figure out what's going to go on with it, and them getting Neil Perry, this hotshot doctor at the mega corporation, to program their rocket that's going to take down the satellite. And I thought, did YouTube fuck up? Is there something wrong with this? Is this the wrong movie? Like, I didn't even think of it in terms of, like, my first thought was not Ian was right. My first thought was, is this the right movie? Ian was right.
Yeah, and then they introduced Neil Perry, the mustachioed hero of this adaptation.
Yep, star of 1978's Exposition, the movie.
Yeah, seems to have a lot of skills. He's an incredible time machine scientist and other stuff. He's got a kind of a Buckaroo Banzai vibe.
Wait, are you talking about the actor John Beck, or are you talking about Dr. Neil Perry?
Both. I'm just saying that, like, this guy seems like a real jack of all trades.
Yeah. Okay.
Just in that he's like a scientist who makes a time machine, but he also looks like he looks,
I'm just looking at my notes and there's so much bullshit to talk about, so I'm going to say a nice thing first.
Okay.
One of George's friends from the 1960 version was played by an actor named Whit Bissell.
Oh.
And Whit Bissell is in this one too. And that's always cute.
Yeah, they did it with the 2002 one too.
Yeah, Uncle Scrooge was in the 2002 one.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Yeah,
everything else is terrible. This movie makes me appreciate all the other TV movies TV movies from the 70s that I've had to watch for this show.
Yeah,
because it establishes a new bottom.
Yeah,
there's a new floor. This is one of the worst scripts I have ever seen.
Yeah, this thing makes the Jeff Goldblum Sleepy Hollow look like so much better than when we were talking about it.
Yeah.
But man, yeah, it
feels like it was written by a 12-year-old. Like, I need to come up with a name for the mega corporation that he works at. What will the name be? Mega corporation. I need to come up with, I'm just doing John Mulaney at this point. I need to come up with the weapon that he's working on that's like a laser death ray. What will it be called? I know. They'll all call it the laser death ray.
That is a actual name of a project that this company is working on.
Oh, and they're not even, there's no internal consistency with it, because at the beginning they're all calling it the laser death ray, but then at the end it's called the death ray laser. And all I'm saying is, if you're going to do something stupid, have some consistency. It's some amazing bullshit. And then we find out that he's been working on this secret side project. Oh, this is after he talks to his personal assistant, who's this, flirty older lady. And she says to him, because he brings her a flower, "I hope I'm not the only female to receive this honor." And he looks at her and winks and says, "You are." And she calls in after him as he goes into his office, "A healthy male should not spend all his time locked up in a stuffy lab." It's my favorite bit of dialogue I've heard in a really long time. So then he goes and gives a presentation to the boss with Whit Bissell there, this older scientist. And he's like, "Hey, here's the deal. I need you to know I'm working on something that is not the laser death ray, which I know you want me to work on, or the antimatter bomb, which, wait, you're telling me I need to work on the antimatter bomb? I won't do it. Instead, I'm talking about, you know what I'm working on? I'm working on a time machine." And do you know what their reaction is to him saying, "I'm working on a time machine"? Their reaction is, interesting. I don't see a practical application for it.
Until like 45 minutes later in the movie, where they're like, "Wait a second. If we had a time machine, we could do all this for money."
Yeah.
Like, it's so dumb.
He goes and uses his time machine. He's gone all weekend, which is weird because it's a time machine, but he comes back and he describes to them where he was.
Yeah.
And in this one, he's invented a TARDIS, because in this one, his time machine can travel through both time and space, because he doesn't go to the future, he goes to the past. And where does he go? He goes to Salem, Massachusetts for the witch trials and gets burned at the stake in his time machine as a witch.
So, okay. So, yes.
I'm sorry, am I
everybody-
going too fast? We
just got to take a second. Yes, everybody, this is the one where he goes into the past and not just the future. And you're like, "Oh, I was wondering if any adaptation."
No, in 2002 he goes into the past.
Well, okay, yes, okay. Technically, he goes into the past, but I mean, like, goes exploring into the past.
You mean goes exploring into the past in a way where every single one of his adventures feels like a different episode in a season of a shitty time travel TV show from the 70s?
First of all, yes. Second of all, yeah, I do mean that. No, so this is the first one where there's any section of the story that involves him going into the past to explore. You're like, "Oh, I was wondering if any of the adaptations weren't going to do that." You're telling me it's bad, so it probably isn't interesting, but like, and yeah, just imagine the most tacked on, no effort doing like scenes involving going back in time you can possibly imagine. It's so
low effort. Low effort is the phrase.
It's crazy. Like, he's just like, he's going to go back in time to, like, I don't know. Yeah, when he goes to Salem, Massachusetts, and they're all wearing pilgrim outfits for some reason. But it's like, literally, he's just in a field, and then a lady runs. Like, I can't explain it. It's so bad.
Don't explain it.
I won't.
Just everyone's going to have to take our word for it, or go watch it on YouTube. Spend an evening watching something like this. We haven't even talked about him going to California for the gold rush, and then it's a Western. It's a whole dang Western. He gets locked up. The sheriff locks him up in the jail, and he uses his future know-how and a paperclip to get himself out. And there's a shootout in the town. He's got to ride out on a horse.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's just the whole. But you're exactly right. It feels as though it's this whole movie was somebody saying, like, "What if we did a whole show of this? It could be a bunch of episodes just like this." And then somebody was like, "No." But
can I do it a little bit? And they're like, "Okay."
You can do it for this movie.
Yeah. But then he does go to the future and meets the Eloy and the Morlocks and everything.
Yes.
So that happens. By the way, Weena is in it. She's played by Priscilla Barnes.
Yep.
Who just longtime television actor.
Yep.
She's pretty good.
Yeah.
And I got no beef with Priscilla Barnes. She's pretty good in this. Oh man, I forgot about. I know I'm just reading a lot of dialogue from this one, but it just tickles me so when he's explaining to them how the time machine works.
The technobabble.
Yes, they say, how does that work? And he says, I had to go back because I had to write it down. Well, in principle, it utilizes an electromagnetic force field to molecularly reconstruct the space-time continuum.
You're goddamn right it does.
Those are words. I've heard those words.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in that order.
Everybody, I want to tell you something. When he travels in time in the time machine, it's got a little 70s digital readout screen
Uh-huh.
that says stuff on it. And when he first uses a time machine to go back in time, on the screen, it keeps cutting to these inserts of the screen. And the screen says, time backward mode. Time backward mode. Then later on, when he goes into the future, it says time forward mode. I'm not kidding. This is the most egregious part of this entire thing, as far as I'm concerned.
In his time machine that, by the way, looks like you went to like an AI image generator and said, make me the time machine from 1960, but make it made out of triangles and sharp.
Exactly. Time backward mode. That's the last time I'll say it. Holy shit.
That's not even my favorite like piece of visual writing in the movie, because my favorite piece of visual writing is when he goes into the future, and the way that he beats the Morlocks is he finds the room where they keep all the weapons that have been developed for years, because there's this whole this one does have like an anti-war thing going for it,
and anti-war, anti-corporate kind of feeling, like, and that's good. It's good that it has those sentiments.
It's good that it's got something, like it's got themes. That's fine. But one of the things he finds has a little sign on it. I want to be clear. This is the year 800,000. And he finds this thing and it has a little plaque on it. And it says, Death Ray Laser developed by Neil Perry, Mega Corporation.
Oh my God.
This just goes back to like, I just want plausible time travel in my science fiction. And it's amazing. It's amazing. I want that prop so badly. Not the laser. I want the card. I want the little plaque.
It's amazing that the plaque says that. It's also like, I just want to be like, this is 800,000 years. Think of the most styrofoam or like all the other things that they say are like never gonna break down would have broken down.
Yeah.
No piece of technology, or especially any sign saying what it is gonna make it 800,000 years.
And who labels their stuff like that? I do want to say one thing before we move on, because this kind of came up in 1960, but it really comes up now, and it's going to come up again in 2002. I just want to talk about how bad of a time traveler our time traveler is.
Uh-huh.
This is a guy who we are told has spent years and millions of dollars developing time travel.
Yeah.
But he seems remarkably unprepared to travel in time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he goes to the past and he's like, where am I? What are you people doing? This is crazy. It's like, at no point did you think maybe if I travel in time, I'll have to travel in time?
Like, I don't even know why why would you write it like this?
When he gets in his time machine to leave for the weekend, because again, he's gone all weekend, even though it's a time machine. Do you know what he doesn't bring with him? Doesn't bring like a bottle of water.
No. Snacks.
Doesn't bring any food. Just himself.
You got to bring a little knapsack. Bring a little bindle.
He's just got his triangle-shaped time machine, his computer that says time backward mode, his mustache and his lapels. That's it.
His very tight shirt, slightly flared pants.
This thing is terrible.
Yeah, it's real bad.
Should we do a quick sidebar?
Yeah.
Time After Time. 1979. It's just a year later. It is pretty cool. Like, I want to talk about it for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's notable for a couple of reasons, but also two, I want to acknowledge that there is a wealth of material out there that's inspired by the time machine that isn't an adaptation of the time machine. There are so many sequels and spin-offs, and to call them all adaptations, I think is not really, I don't think it's really doing these three that we're talking about enough justice, because they really are adaptations of the story. Time After Time is, I think, one of my favorite of all of those that they're adaptations, but they're not really adaptations. So in 1979, a guy named Carl Alexander was writing a book, And before he was finished, he showed the manuscript to a friend of his, a guy named Nicholas Meyer. And Nicholas Meyer, some of you may hear that and go, wait, Nicholas Meyer, who wrote and directed Jeremy's favorite movie of all time, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan? And I would say, yes, absolutely. Thank you for remembering. I love you too. Meyer read it, loved it, and was like, okay, not only do I think it's great, keep doing it, you keep writing your book, but I'm going to write this as a screenplay and I'm going to direct it. And he cast, because it is the story of the time machine. You know, there's the time traveler who invents his time machine back in England in the late 1800s. They decided to make the time traveler H.G. Wells, and he cast Malcolm McDowell, which was really good casting at that point. Right at the beginning, he's showing his friends, telling them about the time machine that he's invented. So in so many ways, it's just like the original story. And then one of his friends, who's Jack the Ripper, decides that he's going to steal the time machine and go to San Francisco in 1979 and fuck shit up. And he goes, and the time machine goes back, and H.G. Wells goes, oh man, like basically in the time that it took for Jack the Ripper to steal his time machine, he figures out that his friend is Jack the Ripper and figures out that he's taken his time machine to the future. So he goes into the future after him, and he goes to modern day San Francisco because, of course, this time machine, I think the whole thing with it is that it's been moved to a museum in San Francisco. So it still only travels in space, but I think it's only the space that the time machine is in.
Or it's more, so this sounds like it's more that the time machine isn't actually moving in time. Who's ever riding it is moving on it in time.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's interesting.
Is it? I'll take your word for it.
It's crazy, and it's a weird thing to do, but yeah.
Because really, this is H.G. Wells versus Jack the Ripper. That's what this movie is. H.G. Wells, time travel in H.G. Wells versus time travel in Jack the Ripper in 1979 San Francisco. And H.G. Wells, he meets Amy Robbins. She was a bank teller, played by Mary Steenburgen, a very young Mary Steenburgen. And they develop a bit of a connection, and he has a whole like showdown with Jack the Ripper. So it's a real. I'll say this. This is an amazing idea. I think it's an incredible idea. And I was always really excited to see the movie because I don't know if I mentioned this, but Nicholas Meyer also wrote and directed my favorite movie of all time, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
I've never heard that before.
And this is, by the way, I will go on record as saying I think this is the second best time travel movie set in San Francisco that Nicholas Meyer ever worked on, because he also co-wrote Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, which I think is the better time travel movie in San Francisco. I don't have much else to say about this one. Ian, you've never seen it, right?
No, I didn't watch it for this because it's not, exactly an adaptation. But
yeah, you're just gonna have to take my word for it.
It sounds cool.
I think it's an amazing idea. I finally saw the movie and was really disappointed. I don't think the movie really delivers on the premise.
It is. I mean, it's a premise. That's for sure. It's one of those great like premises.
Yeah, I just think it's really rough. But there's one very specific thing that I wanted to mention about it that I really enjoy. They did something that kind of honored Wells more than any other adaptation of The Time Machine did, which is that when Wells goes to the future, he is specifically expecting a socialist utopia. Like it's text.
Cool. Yeah.
That's something the character talks about. And when he arrives in current day 1979 in San Francisco, he is horrified to find out that capitalism rules the day. And it's something that he's endlessly frustrated with in the movie. And like that's actually honoring Wells in a way that the other ones don't. So in that way, it's weirdly the closest to the book, but not really, because it's Wells talking about a socialist utopia, not the time traveler. And I'll go back to that, which is that Wells wants a socialist utopia, but he didn't write a time traveler who did.
Right.
And so in that way, it's not like it. So inspired by the Time Machine, yes, but not an adaptation of the Time Machine.
So that means we've got one more.
And there's no way this one could fail because it was produced in the early 2000s, a time where every movie was good. No bad movies were made. It's full of special effects. And as we all remember, the special effects in 2002 were uniformly fantastic. It was going to be such a big thing. It was produced at DreamWorks. It was originally going to be Spielberg directing it. Sorry, Steven Spielberg, just in case. I feel like you could fill a book with people who've directed movies saying, oh, yeah, Spielberg was originally attached to do this, but then he moved on to something else, and then I stepped in.
Yes. Absolutely, you could.
Because Spielberg is a busy boy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it doesn't matter how involved or how true it is. Like, he could have literally said, oh, that would be fun. And if that's it, you can say Spielberg was interested in directing it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we don't know exactly, but this does feel like, I don't know, this feels like one where he probably thought about it pretty hard. Like, I could see Spielberg being like, oh, the time machine, I should make that.
Yeah. No, I believe it. It's plausible. I don't know if it's accurate, but it's plausible.
This is right before he would have been getting started on War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
He just decided to do a different Wells.
He decided, after this one was done, he decided to go back to the Wells. So, actually, he decided to go back to the Wells before this one was made because it was directed by Simon Wells.
Yes.
And you might think, what a coincidence. How cool is that? Not just a coincidence. He was H.G. Wells's literal great-grandson.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say this. He co-directed one of the best movies I think we've ever watched for this show because he co-directed The Prince of Egypt.
Oh, okay. Nice. Yeah, he was an animation guy, right?
Yeah, he was an animation guy, and he had worked with Spielberg for a while on stuff that Spielberg had produced, like The Prince of Egypt. He had co-directed An American Tail, Fievel Goes West. So he wanted to do live action, and he thought, hey, this is perfect. This is, my great-granddad wrote this. I got to do this. And so they gave it to him. He wanted to get into live action. He was not ready.
No.
He said he was not ready.
Yep.
Not only is the movie pretty rough, he basically was suffering from extreme exhaustion, and for the last 18 days of shooting, did not direct this movie.
Yeah.
Instead, Gore Verbinski did.
They had to bring Gore in to pick up some slack. Yeah.
And he came back for post-production, so he's still, he's still the director. He's still there, but he was not ready.
Yeah.
Again, he'd be the first person to say that.
Totally.
I saw this movie in the theater. I was really excited about it because I always loved the original. Like, I grew up watching it on VHS. It was one of those movies my dad showed me and everything. I was like, this is great. And Guy Pearce is the time traveler. This is really cool. This looks really fun. And I saw it in the theater. Did you see it?
I saw it in the theater as well. I think there was probably at least a little bit of a chance that we saw it together.
I mean, it's a non-zero chance, yeah.
I don't remember. I just remember seeing it in the theater.
I would argue that almost nothing in this movie works.
Yeah.
I think a lot of things almost work, but nothing really works. One thing. I think there's one thing that works. The very first time travel sequence when he's in the greenhouse and he's watching time pass around him, I dig it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
I really like it. I thought it was good. No notes. I thought it did the job admirably.
Yeah, it did.
And that's it.
It was a good updating of the 60s effect without trying to go too outside the box, I guess is what I'd say. Like, it was going for the same thing, but with like a more modern flourish, which, I think was good.
There's nice stuff in it. Like, there was one piece of, I think, really, really smart filmmaking. And it's one of those things that, like, it's not like it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen, but it's just very strong, where he's in the time machine and they're trying to show you the bubble that he's in and how the bubble functions. Also, the reason he's traveling through time is because he is sad. He's sad about a lady.
Well, that's the whole thing.
And he's got her picture in a locket, and while he's traveling through time, he takes it out and looks at it, but then it kind of gets sucked away in the wind going on around him, and it gets sucked out of the bubble. And so he reaches out to grab it, and then you see very quickly suddenly his fingernails start growing really long while his hand is outside the bubble, and he pulls his hand back in and the locket falls down, and he watches the locket disintegrate because time is passing so quickly. And it's one of those things where, like, that's an emotional moment. The character is doing something based in emotion, but what it's doing is it's telling us the rules of the world, and it's making it very clear and setting up, like, how the bubble works and what happens when you go outside the bubble. Because, spoiler alert, that's how he kills the bad guy. Pushes him outside the bubble and he disintegrates.
And it'd be really literal one single bad guy, because there had to be an actual operatic bad guy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That's
Anyway.
the whole thing.
But hey, that one little moment, again, part of that sequence, and I really, really liked it.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about some of the things that almost work. Are there things in this movie that you kind of like?
There's a big thing I want to talk about, and I guess I would categorize this as something that I almost like. This first part that I'm going to say is not, because it's the aspect of where he builds the time machine because his fiance dies tragically in a robbery, a mugging gone wrong that is his fault. The movie does not really talk about that very much, but
is it his fault?
Yeah, he's like pulling at the guy's hand with the gun when it's pointed at her. Like
I thought he was pushing his hand. I thought the guy was pulling his hand back to her. This is what we're doing right now. This is happening.
Regardless, he's like struggling with a gun while it's pointed at a person.
Yes.
It's like exactly the wrong thing you should do.
Yeah.
I consider her dying his fault, which of course, in a way, he obviously does too.
Oh, yes.
Because
That's
he creates a time machine in order to fix it. So I think that is silly. I don't I don't like a version of this story. I think I can understand why some people maybe thought it was a good idea, but I don't like a version of this story where he invents a time machine for a reason. It kind of goes against the spirit of the story for me, which is just kind of this pure explorer scientist doing it because he can do it.
No, I could see someone saying that, like, no, just the exploration itself is not a good enough reason. We also need a fridged fiance.
Yeah, you can see that. I mean, like, this is pros and cons. Like, this movie was written by John Logan, who has written some quite good movies, but also some he wrote Skyfall, but he also wrote Star Trek Nemesis. So,
yeah.
he's a very successful screenwriter. I'll put it that way. But he's not always my favorite. But here's my point. What they do in this is basically he can't stop her from dying. And the whole movie, he's wondering why. He travels to the past, stops her from meeting himself farther into the park where the robbery happens.
They make a quick stop off to watch George deck Biff. And then then they go down another side street.
Yeah.
She gets run over by a fucking carriage.
Yeah. So basically she dies again, even though he saved her from one death situation. So, and this is jumping ahead, but at the end of the movie, Jeremy Irons as the Uber Morlock, as he is referred, which is terrible.
That's credited.
Bullshit. The whole movie he's been saying to every character he can get his hands on, why couldn't I save her? Why? What is happening? The Uber Morlock explains it to him that, essentially it's a grandfather paradox. Like, you can't go and save somebody's life if them dying was the reason you invented the time machine, because then you never would have invented the time machine. And blah, 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 blah. Having there be a paradox like that was something that I almost liked in this movie. But it's I didn't like there being a paradox like that is like an interesting wrinkle that I could see you doing a version of this story that had a good one of those. This one, however, and yes, I'm being all time travel nitpicky, which is if we ever had a time travel podcast, that would be the whole thing, was just me being time travel nitpicky about everything.
No, it would be us being time travel nitpicky.
But that's what I'm doing here, and that is that how that would present itself was not that you go back and save her from the one danger and then she just dies from another one like it's fucking Final Destination.
Yeah.
It would be that you go back and save her from the thing, but then you just disappear and go back and everything reverts, and it wouldn't obviously it's time travel. We don't know what would really happen. But the point is that it wouldn't just be that then the universe has to kill her somehow.
Yeah.
It's stupid. I almost liked it, and then they did that.
Yeah. It's dumb.
So that's the thing that I sort of almost liked. Now, you may have listened to everything I just said and be like, I don't think he liked it at all.
This is where we are with this one. These are the levels we're operating in.
Yeah. I will say that one other thing that I almost liked, this will be much quicker, that I almost liked but ultimately didn't, was the visual effects of the Morlocks. They have a lot of practical, like their image and the thing, they've got big animatronic masks on, like they're very practical effects in themselves. But then you got a same like Island of Dr. Moreau problem where anytime they have to do something inhuman, like run and really fast on all fours, then it looks like crappy CGI.
Can I disagree a little?
Okay, yeah, yes, of course you can.
I thought the CGI was pretty good.
Well, it's not as bad as it was in the Island of Dr. Moreau, but
no, like first of all, I think it's wonderful that you're comparing it to the Island of Dr. Moreau. You're talking about the Val Kilmer, Marlon Brando one, obviously.
Yes, of course.
I also immediately thought of that because there is in that one, there's the the leopard person who runs off into the jungle, and boy, it's a pickle. It's some of the worst special effects I've ever seen.
Yes.
And yes, that was like, what, 6 years earlier?
Yeah.
And like I said, all the special effects in 2002 were perfect. But
Yeah.
I remember like just watching it the other night when the Morlocks like get down on all fours and run off, and it's very clear that they are CGI, but honestly, I kind of liked it. And I remember thinking, that looks way better than the Island of Dr. Moreau. Good for them.
I will give you that it looks better than it could or should, but I still don't think it looks great.
I mean, the thing that Island of Dr. Moreau, the problem with that was that all the makeup effects were fantastic, but the CGI was terrible. The makeup effects are fantastic because it's all Stan Winston Studio doing the Morlocks. But I'm pretty sure ILM did all the digital effects.
Yes.
And like I think they're actually pretty good. I don't mind them. The Morlocks are on my list as things that like almost work.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm just being era biased. You know, it just has that kind of 2002 the CGI has that kind of 2002 sheen on it, and I'm sure I'm just being biased about that.
The effects in this movie wouldn't make their way into a TV show today.
Yeah.
Like, let's be clear about that. But no, I thought the Morlocks, I also have them on my list of like things that almost work.
The animatronics are good. The faces are good.
I think the
very
Morlocks
cool.
are fun. I like them. And by the way, one of the other things that's really nice about this whole attack is that it's so easy to see them all because it happens in the fucking daytime.
Yeah, they're not like allergic to the sun for some reason.
The one goddamn thing that is clear about the Morlocks is that they've been living underground for millennia and can't go out in the light. And here they are. They are. It doesn't matter. Does not matter at all. I hate it.
Yeah, that's not great. And then of course there's the Uber Morlock.
Well, hang on. That doesn't work at all. So two other things that I think almost work in this. One of them, Weena's not in this.
Yes.
Instead it's Mara.
Yes.
Same character.
Essentially.
Played by Samantha Mumba.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when Samantha Mumba never stopped being Samantha Mumba, but certainly like she is not as popular now as she was then. And she was never even the most popular like young pop singer at the time, but she wanted to act. And she got cast in this. And I'll go ahead and say this. I think Samantha Mumba's good in this movie.
Oh, okay. I never found myself thinking that she was very bad. So I'll go with you on that one.
She's good. The character as written is not great, and that's not her fault.
Nope.
But I actually think she has a quality in this that, like, watching it, I definitely could see why she was cast for reasons other than she is a name.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's let's get someone the kids will like, that kind of thing. Like she actually seems like she holds her own. Also does a really good American accent, which is totally appropriate for the Eloy 800,000 years in the future because she is Irish. And in fact, like, did you catch her Irish accent?
That is good. No,
when she got angry?
I didn't. That's funny.
There's a scene where she gets really angry, like really agitated, and she's like really impassioned, yelling at our hero, and her Irish accent really comes through in that moment.
Well, that can happen.
Yeah.
No, anyway. So like about the language, this is the thing with this one. The 1961 just doesn't address it at all. The Eloy 800,000 years in the future just speak English.
No, same in 1978 too.
Yeah, exactly. In this one, they don't. They speak another language. However, she knows English because it's the language of the stones or whatever they call it.
Stone language.
Stone language.
Stone speak.
Which is
stone
that
language?
there's a bunch of English printed on a bunch of old decaying monuments that they look at, even though that would not cause you to, seeing that stuff and even studying it very hard, I don't think would lead to you, a single person, being able to, figure out what the sounds were and have a really good accent of it.
No.
So that doesn't make any even fucking sense at all.
Tarzan figured out how to do it, but all he figured out how to do was read it. He couldn't talk it.
Exactly. This makes less sense than Tarzan.
That's a problem.
So it's truly cursed.
That is a
truly
problem. But then I think the last thing that like almost works in this is Guy Pearce.
Yeah.
And I love Guy Pearce's work. I love watching him in things. He's acting circles around everybody else. So, like, one of the things that doesn't work in this movie are accents. There's just bad accents top to bottom. His best friend, who's Philby, is Mark Addy, who's a great actor, but they make him... Oh, and they've moved the whole thing to New York City. Oh, I also keep talking about him. Dr. Alexander Hartigan That is the main character.
Yeah.
So his best friend Philby, Mark Addy, has an American accent. I don't know why you would make Mark Addy do an American accent. Don't. Just make, I mean, I think they did he was in like the Flintstones sequel or something. But anyway, making him do an American accent doesn't work. And it's incredibly distracting. But then you've got Guy Pearce there who's doing this pretty perfect American accent. Because that's just one of Guy Pearce's talents, is being able to take on stuff like that.
Right.
And it's such an energetic performance. Did you read Ebert's review?
No.
Ebert didn't like this. So there was GQ did a really good interview with Guy Pearce very recently talking about his career.
I saw some excerpts from that. Yeah.
And one of the things they talk about is the time machine. And so I'm quoting GQ quoting Roger Ebert, so I'll try to make it clear when which is which. This is them quoting Ebert. Pearce, as the hero, makes the mistake of trying to give a good and realistic performance, wrote Roger Ebert, in a scathing pan that accidentally nails the reason traditional leading man parts weren't Pearce's destiny. Back to Ebert. Jeremy Irons, at least, knows what kind of movie he's in as the Uber Morlock and hams it up accordingly. Pearce seems thoughtful, introspective, quiet, morose. Back to GQ. Viewed in light of what he'd do next, it's clearly a movie that robs Pearce of all the weapons that make him compelling as an actor, but it helped him discover what he didn't want to experience again on a project. And Pearce said, I think the process of it felt way too big for me. I can't make sense of this idea of studio films where you just get told what to do by people afraid to lose their jobs. I remember there were discussions at the beginning about how I was going to look. A couple of the executives say, no, he'll just cut his hair and he'll just do this and he'll do that. And I'm in the room going, hello? I'm immediately feeling like my intuition doesn't mean anything here. That's a killer for me. It was the first time I really felt that there was not just a disconnect, but a kind of greater power up there that you couldn't even really talk to, he said. The only solution was to step away and regroup. So he kind of stopped. He only did movies like this for a minute, and then he stopped doing movies like this.
Yeah, which happens to a lot of people.
And I find him endlessly entertaining, and I think he is giving his all. And Simon Wells talked a lot about how prepared he was coming to it, because Simon Wells didn't give him a lot, because Simon Wells wasn't prepared for any of this and wasn't prepared to direct all the actors. And Guy Pearce, thankfully, did a lot of prep and was ready to do something. It just didn't work. But it wasn't because he didn't put in a lot of effort.
Yeah, that's interesting. He is good. I've got one more almost liked thing. Honestly, I think it's the closest thing to a fully liked thing. The the library and museum piece that is an actual AI played by Orlando Jones.
You're talking about Vox 114?
Yes. Now, it's tough because it's one of those things where, like, while I like the AI surviving into the far future, because you give me some, like, any kind of, like, long alone gone crazy AI, I eat that shit up. Like, I love that stuff. So I like that. Does it make any sense that it would survive into 800,000 years? No, not at all. But I still kind of like it. I think Jones does a pretty good job. The whole concept just doesn't work and kind of ultimately becomes pointless. But I liked the update to having the rings, or even just some kind of, like, fill in for the library surviving through time being an AI that you can talk to. I liked that. The whole thing didn't really come together, but that was an almost like for me.
I mean,
what do you think about that?
The whole thing didn't really come together describes so many aspects of this movie.
Of course.
No, I hated Vox 114. I hated every part of it just because the movie's not about AI. Yeah. And so it was super lazy AI. Yeah. Just the laziest stuff I've ever seen.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not like, I'm talking about the part of it that I liked was just the concept.
Yeah. I get that. I think one of the big problems I have with this movie is just how confused it is about what it wants to be about. Like, it's constantly trying to be about different things. And so either that's, like, if we're just talking about Alexander, he's got many arcs. He's got all these potential arcs at the beginning. They load him up with character traits and pieces of information that are connected to him, all things that could potentially pay off at the end of the movie, but most don't. He's incredibly forgetful. He's scatterbrained. He's an inventor. He loves gadgets. He's a futurist. He's always thinking about the future. He's a nonconformist as well. He has a really big problem with people wearing bowler hats for some reason. They bring up the fucking bowler hats so many goddamn times. The whole movie ends on bowler hats because he hates bowler hats. Like, so stupid.
That shit is the closest closest that it comes to the like social commentary. Like,
but he's just a nonconformist.
Right. It mostly loses all of that stuff because it's so focused on like his like dead fiance and love story thing.
Yeah.
So it like doesn't really have any of that stuff. There's nothing about the society of the future that really talks that much about our society at all.
Yeah.
The Morlocks are just like, they just went underground, and then some of them either just one or a small percentage of them gained super intelligence and mental and psychic powers. Like,
well, you're kind of skipping to the Morlocks, but yeah, that is the thing where they took the whole thing of like L. Wells's exploration of like a caste system. They just took it and transposed it to only the Morlocks. And so like, there aren't just one type of Morlocks. There are many types of Morlocks. And some of the Morlocks are smart and psychic. And some of the Morlocks are dumb and strong. And the psychic ones control the dumb, strong ones. And also the psychic ones are Jeremy Irons. Like they've been bred for this. Like that. Yeah, there's another theme that like never really gets delivered on. But every single one of those things for Alexander, like he's forgetful. That means nothing by the end of the movie. He's a futurist. He doesn't really seem to have much of an opinion about what the world is like at this point. That never really comes into it. His nonconformism has nothing to do with any of the stuff that happens to him in the rest of the story. Like nothing.
He's also just a real classic, I know we've talked about this before in one form or another, but he's a real classic example of modern Hollywood making films where the character is like a smart person, but it's like a smart person from the perspective of not very smart people. It's just like he's just annoying.
Yeah.
Because the people that are either writing it or producing it are like, we got to make sure we show that these smart people are annoying. I don't know.
Also, by the way, he's so unprepared for time travel. Like he finally makes it back to Emma. Like he makes it back in time. He sees her coming towards him. And it's like he didn't even think, you know what? If I make it back there, she's going to walk towards me and I'm going to have to see her. It's like he's completely surprised by her.
Yeah.
And he's just like stammering all over himself and everything like that. It's like, dude, you did this on purpose. This was the mission.
Yeah. Every other time travel story with people trying to change the past, they have a casino heist level intricate plan about how they're going to do it. But he was just like, I'll just go back there.
I'll just go back there and I'll figure it out.
And then I'll stare at her shockedly when she walks over to me.
Oh, like, so wait, don't you think that's going to freak her out? Yeah, probably.
And I'll just be like, we're not going to go that way. We're going to go this way. And she'll be like, oh, okay. And then she'll die anyway.
Yeah. So those are all the things about his character that never really come back. But then there are also bigger themes that never really pay off into anything, like all the stuff with Vox and the AI. Like this movie's really confused. He's this completely emotional artificial intelligence, but the movie's not about him. So like it could be, but it's not. The Uber Morlock doing all his big soliloquy at the end about what the future is, like it happens so late in the plot and it's so disconnected from everything that happened before it that it doesn't feel rewarding in any way. I didn't feel like I got to something illuminating. I just felt like I got to another scene.
I feel like what you just described, that problem is like the number one thing in this movie that either reviewers or audience at the time didn't like completely made it bad for them, even if they didn't necessarily know how to put it into words. They often talk about how the whole thing just all of a sudden turns into a last minute action thing out of nowhere. And or some, I see a lot of descriptions like that. And so I think that is what people were reacting to negatively.
Yeah. And then the theme of like predestination and like not being able to change the past, like that's introduced, but it's not really, doesn't mean anything, and it's certainly not from the original book, and it does nothing to do with his story. Anyway.
Yeah, it's not even like, it's like, you can't change the past in that particular instance, because like if you could change the past about something that didn't have to do with you creating the time machine, but that gets way too complicated to talk about. But
like what if he goes into the past with his plans for the time machine and gives himself the plans for the time machine and then stops her from dying? That's fine. I mean, that's bootstrap. Anyway.
Right.
Anyway, I think we can agree on one thing.
Yeah.
How incredibly lucky is it that when he blew up his time machine, it only blew up all the Morlocks underneath the ground?
Yes, another one where it just
in a giant
destroyed.
cataclysmic explosion. But it thankfully did not go up to the surface almost at all and didn't hurt any of the Eloi.
Yeah, it's crazy. And once again, the Eloi and the Morlocks just in this one 100-mile.
Yep. They're the only ones.
Yeah.
They're the only ones.
Yep.
And we get this very nice, I actually like the idea at the end of having the end be Mark Addy is talking to Phyllida Law as Mrs. Watchett, kind of saying where is he? Where did he go? Maybe he's in the future. That's always where he wanted to be. And it's done as this kind of split screen because they're in the same place. Like Alexander is with, I want to call her Weena, but it's not Weena. Mara. He's with Mara and her little brother, who actually was Samantha Mumba's little brother, which was very cute. Her little brother, Omero. And so they're kind of there next to each other in the same place, but in different times. And I actually thought that was kind of a cool idea. But it's then immediately undercut by the fact that Mark Addy walks out the window and then basically does the Mary Tyler Moore thing where he throws his hat up in the air because he's like, fucking bowler hats. And then the credits roll.
He says, I will honor him by getting rid of my bowler hat.
He hated bowler hats. Actually, I do have one last thing, and this is just about, this just makes sense to me, and I think it'll help answer the questions when we go through the quadrants. The website Inverse did an interview with Simon Wells, and they were talking to him about directing The Time Machine, and they said, what elements of the original H.G. Wells novel were important to retain? Mm-hmm. And his answer doesn't surprise me. He said, I came into that movie after a lot of work had been done developing the story. I didn't really know as much about the story as I should have. I was more the director for hire, and I didn't know enough to exert influence. I had more impact on the overall look of the movie and had great fun working with the production designer in designing the Time Machine.
Which also, in this one, looked great.
Time Machine looks great.
Yeah.
But that says everything.
Yeah.
And
yeah, totally.
I feel like that's too much pressure to put on one person. Like, your great-grandfather wrote this story, and now you have to deliver it to the screen. That's good if the book means a lot to the great-grandkid.
Right.
But if the book doesn't mean a lot to the great-grandkid, yeah, they're just a director for hire at that point. And the movie's not going to be any better because of it. And it's not going to show that anyone cared anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole thing is disappointing.
Just a bummer.
Yeah.
Do you want to do some quadrants?
Yeah, please.
All right. So 1960. Do you think they cared about the source material?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Was it successful?
The most successful.
You were nodding your head a lot on this audio medium.
Yeah, I think it's pretty successful.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Again, the fact that I like it is just a testament to how much of it is successful, given how much of it isn't.
Exactly.
1978. Do you think that Henning Schellerup and Wallace C. Bennett, the director and writer of this TV version of The Time Machine, cared about the source material?
No.
Was it successful?
No.
Yeah, agreed. 2002. Do you think they cared about the source material?
Not really. Not particularly. I mean, I don't know. I think kind of, but
honestly, I bet they cared more about the George Powell version than they did the book.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah, I said that. Yeah, they cared about the 60 movie.
Yeah, so I don't think they cared about the book. Yeah. And was it successful?
No.
You know, the 2002 Time Machine was undone by the same thing that H.G. Wells predicted: capitalism.
Yeah, and being pushed to March instead of December because they were worried it was going to conflict with Lord of the Rings.
I mean, here's the deal. That was a smart move in retrospect.
Yeah.
Well, this has been Adapter Parish. If you'd like to find us online, we're on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook for now at AdaptCast. We're on Mastodon at adaptcast@mastodon.social. You can join our Adapter Parish fans group on Facebook, again, for now. And you can find and follow Ian and myself on Letterboxd forever. And you can always send an email to adapterparishcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, there are a number of great ways that you can do it. First, tell a friend. Second, a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice would be greatly appreciated. Third, we are on Patreon. The show will always be free, but if you become a patron, you can get access to Adapter Parish Plus, our backlog of bonus shows, and our patron-only Slack community. You can find the details at patreon.com/adaptcast. Finally, if you go to bookshop.org/shop/adaptcast, we've created a storefront where you can purchase all of the books we've covered on the show. Part of every purchase will support us and a local bookstore of your choice. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot this. I'm looking at my notes, and we should have talked about this.
Okay.
Just another thing about the 2002 version that makes me mad.
Oh, go on.
The time machine and H.G. Wells are a thing in this world. He goes to the fucking library, and he's like, tell me about time machines. And Orlando Jones AI is like, oh, time machine? You mean the H.G. Wells book, The Time Machine? Like, fuck you. Fuck off. I hate it. That's how much weird shit is in this movie that I completely forgot about that.
You know what else pisses me off about that scene is that the AI, the Orlando Jones AI, is like all of a sudden like oh, thinks he's talking about science fiction, and so he's like bored and like flippant about it. Like, you're a library computer.
Yeah,
you shouldn't be like, oh, you're talking about science fiction. How passe, you know, like what are you passing judgment on this shit?
I hate it. Anyway, bye everybody.
Bye.